Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Josh Brown, Executive Director of the New Zealand Israel Innovation Hub, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event hosted by us. And I'm just very thankful for everybody participating and to all our panelists and for Simon today for joining us as moderator. So, the New Zealand Israel Innovation Hub is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to building trade between Israel and New Zealand through innovation and technology partnerships. We bring together business leaders, policymakers, researchers, business leaders. Oh, I mentioned business leaders twice. They must be very important. And innovators across the region. And today's event reflects exactly the kind of conversation we believe matters most. One that is rigorous, geopolitically honest, and directly relevant to where we sit in the world. The Middle East is being remade in real time. The confrontation between Israel, Iran, and the United States is reshaping alliances, energy markets, and the global security architecture in many ways that will be felt far beyond the region, including here in the Pacific. Today's panel brings together six exceptional voices to help us make sense of it. Ahmed Quraishi is a Pakistan-based Middle East expert, specialist, currently advising the American Jewish Congress, a genuinely rare vantage point that spans the Muslim world and the Jewish American policy community simultaneously. Ella Rosenberg is a regulatory expert at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, one of Israel's most respected foreign policy institutions, with deep expertise in the legal and strategic dimensions of regional conflict. Eitan Fischberger is an independent researcher and writer whose work has appeared in the National Review, NBC News, and the New York Daily News, bringing sharp analytical commentary to a broad public audience. Bren Carlill is a Middle East analyst at the Australian Israel Jewish Affairs Council and one of the most prominent voices in Australia on Israel affairs, regional security, and the domestic implications of the conflict. Nadim Shehadi is an economist, historian, and political advisor with decades of experience in senior academic and think tank roles across Europe and the United States, offering a long-run structural perspective on the region's transformation. And Simon O'Connor, who will be the discussion facilitator today, is a former New Zealand National Party MP, now a commentator and podcaster, and he will bring an important Kiwi lens to today's discussion. We have a large panel, and we've also got a rich agenda ahead of us from asymmetric warfare and Iran's proxy networks to energy markets, trade routes, and what small democracies like New Zealand and Australia, well, Australia's not so small, it's a medium power, should actually be thinking about right now. So let's get into it. Thanks so much, Simon.
Josh, thank you very much. And can I just welcome everyone who's attending the webinar? First and foremost, our panelists coming from all around the world, a breadth of expertise as well. So to each of them, thank you. And to all of those joining the webinar, and of course for Josh and the team for presenting it. This is going to be about 90 minutes long. The first 60 minutes is going to be a panel discussion, which I'll facilitate with our guests. The last 30 or so minutes is a chance for those of you in the webinar to be asking questions, or rather, as the panel is talking over the next 60 minutes or so, if you have questions for them, please put them in the chat. The team will curate those and get them to me. If you want to direct them towards a specific person, then be assured to put that in your comments as well. As you can imagine, there is no shortage of topics, and we're going to do our best to tick along. But we're going to start. I'm going to start with your good self, Ella, if I might. And it's really going to be a question for each of you. And it's starting at a very, very high level, and then we'll narrow down. It's really just asking you, what is, Ella, your view on where the current conflict sits? Is anyone, be it Israel, Iran, or rather the Islamic regime, the US, and others, are any achieving their objectives? So, yeah, in a couple of minutes, which is a little unfair, your summary of where things are at and where they're headed.
I think it's $1 million question. First of all, good morning to everyone from Tel Aviv. Secondly, regarding your question, I think it's $1 million question that no one can really answer. The only person who can answer this fully sits in Washington. His name is Donald Trump. And even him, as an individual, I think has a specific fragmentation between what he thinks should be right and should be done in comparison to US policy. So currently, as we're speaking, yesterday we had a small attack on the UAE, drone-wise, and currently there's no similar attack in Israel. So to that effect, if you look at the kinetics of the specific conflict, you see that in Israel it's rather quiet, and in the UAE it's not. To that effect, you need to bear in mind that this is not a stable ceasefire, and it can also cease at any moment. Why? For the very main reason that this entire conflict is not based on whether, and it's my opinion, also the opinion of the JCFA, the research institute that I work with, is the fact that this is not just a nuclear, or I don't want to say conflict because it's not a nuclear conflict, but towards a nuclear conflict or any sort of missile conflict. The conflict here is of energy. So if you look at the relations between the US and China within the past few years, you see trade wars. But to that effect, you also see a lot of energy wars. And the specific conflict that we currently see is mainly focusing on the issue of oil that's traveling or not traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. And the main issue now, and this is, I think, what Donald Trump wants to decide, is whether he has a specific person to discuss his needs or his current affairs in Tehran. For him, it doesn't really matter if it's going to be the regime or anyone else. For him, it just really matters that Jared Kushner can land in Tehran, come, have someone pick him up, make or conduct the specific research or specific deals that he wants to do, and come back in the same way that he does it in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and also other countries in the GCC area. So it's very important to understand, firstly, that the issue of oil is of crucial importance when it comes to this specific conflict. In addition to that, one of the things that I've noticed during this specific conflict is the issue of licensing. So funny enough, I've never seen a war with licensing, and this war has been very, very dramatic when it comes to licensing, mainly because OFAC, which is the regulatory body in the US that's deciding whether sanctions should be imposed or not, issued a U license in March 2026 for the sole reason to remove, or at least to minimize the oil prices going up. And to that effect, it did go down, because once you're able to launder the specific funds of oil proceeds coming from oil sitting in the Hormuz Straits into regular banking, the oil prices did go down. To that effect, that license was ceased on April 19th, and now we have the W license. And that W license essentially means that every single person that dealt with oil during the U license will now have to de-minimize their own risk, and to that effect, cease working with the Iranian regime. And when I mean the Iranian regime, I mean, when it comes to oil, to the National Iranian Oil Company, NIOC. So when you look at the W license as a whole, it's trying to minimize the amount of work that, as a company, you're supposed to work with Iran. So it's a very difficult situation currently for the US to decide, and I also wrote a paper about it yesterday, meaning it's a matter of policy. So the US needs to decide, and it's a binary option, funny enough, whether they would like to see the regime fall or whether they would like to see oil prices fall. It's one or the other. So currently we're in that state, and to that effect, we're also expecting some sort of retaliation within the next few days. I hope it won't happen, because I like walking outside and going to the gym. And if we do have some sort of missile airstrike, we won't be able to do that. But yes, it's a very interesting story. I think it's the first war in my, I'm quite young, I'm 33, but it's the first war that I've been researching that I've seen it work in a twofold. In the sense that you have the Iranian regime that's becoming stronger, and you have the Iranian state that's becoming weaker, very similar in what happened in the Soviet Union in the 1990s, where the KGB became stronger and the Soviet Union became weaker. To that effect, you also have the issue of oil versus missiles, and within oil, you have the issue of the licensing. So that's where things stand currently.
So a lot to unpack there. I might turn to you, Ahmed, because I know you have been in a number of conflicts to riff off what Ella was just saying. You've covered a lot in your time. And it's the same question to you as it will be with all panelists. I mean, what is your take of where the conflict sits currently? Are any of the parties achieving their objectives from what you can see? And is there a clear way forward at the moment?
Exactly, Simon. I mean, those are the pertinent questions, and thank you very much for having me, and good morning to all of you. It's a great panel. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack, but I'll be very quick just to give an overview within a couple of minutes that you designated. I just say that, this is more about for us, I mean, who have lived in this region all our lives. It's I would say a dramatic moment, really, for all of us. I mean, this is something that we've lived with since we were kids. I mean, I caught the last few years of the Iran-Iraq War, late 1980s. I remember that. I remember faintly the initial Fedayeen camps of the PLO and Fatah in Kuwait before they moved to Lebanon. Before that, they were in Jordan. All of that history, the second largest Palestinian diaspora in Kuwait, for example, up until 1990s, and whatever happened after that, and the role that Iran, the revolution, played in reshaping the Middle East over the past 47 years. So for me, this is huge. I mean, I still recall when I was getting into my classroom in Kuwait City in 1983, when just a few blocks away, there were two car bombs right in front of the American and the French embassies. So it became really very personal for a lot of us, and a lot of us here on the panel, especially Ella from Israel, and I'm sure a lot of you who have been involved with the situation in the Middle East. It's been really very personal for all of us. So what I'm looking at right now, yes, I mean it's a very legitimate question to ask. Where everyone stands right now in this conflict. We can discuss that. But to me, I'm really watching how the region is being reshaped. This region has been stagnant for like a century. We had radical ideologies that took over, seized power across the region, and there are two types. There were two types of radical ideologies. There was the violent Arab nationalist. You can call it radical left. I don't want to upset my friends on the left, really, but these were violent socialist or communist Arab nationalist ideologies that seized power in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and those are gone. Yes, but we're still living with the aftershocks of that. But I'm also more concerned about the fall or the potential fall as a result of the war we see right now in Iran or around Iran. I'm worried and I'm concerned and I'm watching very closely. And so are a lot of people across the region, from Pakistan to Morocco to Israel to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf country. We're watching what will happen to Khomeiniism that seized power in Iran in 1979, and what will happen to even a larger ideological radical construct, which is what we call here the Ikhwanism, or that's Arabic for Muslim Brotherhood, which was born 80 years ago, which, by the way, spawned not just Sunni militant organization, but also played a role in inspiring Khomeiniism, which is Shia jihadism, which is in power right now in Iran. So we're watching all of that. This war is not just about Hormuz. It's not just about the U.S. and Iran. It's really about will the Middle East finally be liberated and freed from these violent ideologies, and will we be, and we see this conflict right now in how different countries in the region see the future. There's Iran and maybe some others who see a future that is based on populism and maybe violence and militant organizations. But we also have countries like, for example, Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, others, Kuwait, Jordan, Morocco, who feel, Azerbaijan, who feel that we can have a different future. We need to get rid of this past. So this war is about all of this.
And thank you for that, because it just begins to highlight the depth and complexity of things. Eitan, if I could turn to you, and I better say to Bren, I'm not ignoring you at the end because you're Australian, but Eitan, your take again, as Ella and Ahmed have done. I mean, what's your perspective on where things are currently, and is there any particular way forward that you think is clearer than not?
So to be honest, in terms of the military and strategic and energy analysis, I would leave it to Ahmed and Ella, who are far more suited to discuss such matters. than I focus on the disinformation and the propaganda war of things. And I think in terms of the propaganda war, we can just see everything heating up again as time goes on, whether the conflict escalates again to a full-blown kinetic war or not, like it was last month and the preceding month before that. Either way, the what has been unleashed in terms of the information war is, I think, something that no one has ever seen, and I think Iran, maybe even the Islamic Republic itself, was surprised about how effective its methods were, and I think that you're just going to see more of that. I think that even though the kinetic war has sort of died down a little bit the last few weeks, you still see the regime and its acolytes, its puppets, whatever you want to call them, pumping out propaganda nonstop to try to turn the Western public and in particular the American public against the war. So yeah, I think you can just expect to see more of that moving forward, either at the very least at the level that we're seeing it now or drastically intensified.
And Eitan, I'll be coming back to actually that whole area of propaganda and disinformation to you in a bit. Bren, the same question to yourself. I mean, from obviously here in the Pacific, you are looking into the Middle East. I mean, is there a way out of this that is more expected than not, or is it still just completely unclear with all the various parties muddling their objectives and wants?
I think to turn briefly to your original question as to who's winning or who has achieved their objectives, I think there are three ways of looking at that, right? You've got the tactical objectives, strategic objectives, and then if you like, over a length of time, the war that Iran launched against America and Israel in 1979. And I think the jury's out on that third one, and we can go back to it later. On tactical objectives, the US and Israel have achieved all of their tactical objectives, and they've done so um, uh, very well militarily, right? They've wiped out the Iranian Navy. They've bombed all the sites that they wanted to bomb. They've won tactically, but strategically, I think Iran is currently winning the war. And if the war ends now, then Iran will be able to claim a big strategic victory. And there's for two main reasons. First of all, I think the Iranian regime sees this war as existential. And so the fact that they are surviving to them is a strategic victory, and they will claim it. They will, presuming they survived this war, they will claim that they have won the war because of that, for that very reason. But also, the Strait of Hormuz and the blocking of it is a potential weapon that Iran had for many, many years. And I'd say that everyone in this webinar probably assumed that Iran was going to deploy that weapon if a war started, and Iran did. And the fact that the US doesn't appear to have an answer for it, and as a result, oil prices around the world have skyrocketed, is a strategic win for Iran. And if the situation ultimately ends with Iran having gained an advantage from blocking the Strait of Hormuz, then that will be a big strategic victory for Iran. And obviously, this is Trump's dilemma now as to how to unblock the strait without giving Iran too much of an advantage for having blocked it in the first place. So,
Really pleased that you've made the distinction between the strategic and the tactical. And again, with time, I'm hoping to get back to the question of Hormuz. I think Nadim Shahadi is here. Nadim, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Uh, Simon O'Connor's my name, moderating. Welcome. It's lovely to have you along. We're just doing the introductory questions, which your other four panelists have just completed, which was a very broad question, but really asking where you see the conflict currently. Where does it lie? Where is it heading? Is, as Bren was just touching, of the various parties involved, obviously Israel, the US, and the Islamic Republic, are any of them achieving their objectives at the moment?
Um, well, I'm in a way opposed to this kind of thinking of defining objectives and strategy and being able to evaluate where it's going from assumed objectives and assumed strategy. Because I mean, my view is that if you're playing chess, you do not reveal your strategy. Your advantage is when your opponent does not know your strategy, and we are a lot of what is mentioned about the Iranians is probably the product of the imagination of the analyst. They have this romantic view of the Eastern wise men who play chess, who invented chess, who uh, who can make carpets, one thread at a time, the long view, all that. This is all I think part of the mythology of some of the analysts, and at the same time, I think they in a way underestimate uh, Trump. There is this syndrome in America that they can't take President Trump seriously, and you have this nervous laugh when they talk about President Trump, and they ridicule, they create a caricature. I mean, I'm not saying he's not ridiculous sometimes, but you have to overcome these emotions when you're doing that. So I will take the view here that we don't know the objectives until the war is over, and and um, and that's how it is. But and the war evolves, of course, because the way it's going, the Iranians are making it impossible for them to be tolerated as a player in the region, or even the Europeans cannot live with an Iran that holds the whole world hostage. So if that's their strategy to make themselves um, totally unacceptable, it's a bad one.
Appreciate that insight. Actually, I like myself the idea that we won't really know the objectives and or if they've been achieved until till the end. I thought I might then just turn to your good self, Bren, and then come back to all of you. It's sort of a secondary open question. I mean, we are primarily a webinar based here in New Zealand and Australia. Um, from your perspective, um, is this a conflict that New Zealand or Australia or the Pacific, needs to be deeply concerned about beyond, I would put to you, fuel prices or access to the likes of phosphates, ureas, and minerals? Is it something that we should be deeply concerned about and well engaged with here, as I say, New Zealand, Australia, the Pacific?
Well, as someone whose career has focused on international affairs, yes. But more seriously, the blockade of an important geographical choke point, I think, has made people in places like Australia and New Zealand that are island countries and that are reliant on sea lanes, highly vulnerable sea lanes, for everything from fuel and from almost everything we import in great numbers. And I think there is more of an appreciation that those choke points are vulnerable. Some Indonesian minister, I can't remember his exact title, the other day floated the idea that they should start putting a tax on the Strait of Malacca. And that was quickly dismissed. But that's a key point. If Iran gets away with this, then other countries will be like, oh, well, we have a stranglehold or a potential stranglehold over other geographical choke points, but also economic choke points, such as critical minerals and things like that. Um, so I think this war has made people in Australia and New Zealand and frankly around the world much more aware of the potential damage that those choke points can do for us. To us. So I think that's the main lesson from the war from over here.
Ahmed, to you again, a New Zealand audience, an Australian audience listening to this at the moment, some even from the Pacific. Why is there a conflict in the Middle East significant to them, or should be significant?
Yes, I think you should be very, very concerned in New Zealand and Australia. And I say that not because I'm sitting here and I'm overwhelmed by what's happening, but purely if I were living in New Zealand and Australia, As Bren said, first of all, I'd be very concerned about creating a precedence here in Hormuz about choke points, and you're dependent on a lot of those where you are, number one. But number two, more importantly, also, if Hormuz remains closed for an extended period of time, we're looking at you considering buying your energy from probably the United States, and that would and that's not bad. Obviously, it's good. U.S. oil companies are making hay, while this crisis lasts in the Gulf, and they should. And President Trump seems to be very focused on that. But that will also lead to inflation worldwide, including you, because obviously the cost of importing energy from the United States is a bit higher. I'm not an expert, but I know this much: it is a bit higher than if you were importing from the Gulf, and that's very, very important. So you're looking at an extended period of inflation worldwide and not just New Zealand and Australia. So you have precedents. It's a national security matter for you. You have inflation for a long, long time to come. You will need to readjust not just your logistics as to importing energy from the United States, but you will also have to readjust your foreign policy or important aspects of your foreign policy, since you'll become dependent on one source or for a great deal of your energy consumption on one source. So all of that is really a national security matter for you sitting in New Zealand and Australia, and for everyone else, frankly, for the Japanese, for the Koreans, for everyone. So it's a serious matter. I'm sitting here in Pakistan, and Pakistan is a country of nearly 250 million people. We are right at the entrance to the Arabian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz. We're in the Arabian Sea, and we're right next to the Gulf of Oman, and then the Gulf, the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, whatever you want to call it, and the Strait of Hormuz. We get 80% of our energy, LNG, petroleum products from the Gulf. Every other option, including via the Red Sea, is much more expensive. The U.S. is where Pakistan is already importing a chunk of its energy from the U.S. It has placed orders. But it's going to result in huge inflation in this country. It's going to change this country's foreign policy. It's going to change this country's the way it looks at its energy security, its national security. So yes, in New Zealand and Australia, you need to be very, very concerned about this crisis. And if somebody thinks that this is this is too far away, it's not going to impact us, you're wrong. Even if you forget the whole politics of it, whether you're with the US or you sympathize with the Iranians or whatever, it's going to impact you directly.
Ella, what's your take on this? Again, a message to a New Zealand audience about what's happening.
Well, my take is more regulatory speaking in that sense, and I do want to look at the Pacific more, and also in the Indo-Pacific to that effect, and less regarding Australia and New Zealand specifically. One of the things that the Iranian regime does very, very well is build shadow banking. In that sense, in a way for them to transfer funds, they build shell companies in different countries, such as the UAE or Turkey, and then they funnel money to those specific shell companies in those countries, and from those countries they funnel it out, and vice versa. That's how the methodology has been working up until February 2026. When February 26 came along and the UAE was starting to see that there's a bit of an issue when it comes to working or at least allowing certain types of prohibited transactions conducted in their countries, and it escalated in March. What they did, funny enough, they tried to halt these specific transactions, and they're doing it to a very good extent. Now, the Iranian regime sits in a standstill when it thinks they need to find a specific geolocation that enables them, regulatory speaking, to find the lowest threshold for them to conduct their illegal business. And funny enough, they found a very strategic place to that extent, which is Taiwan. Because Taiwan, if you look at their new, yes, it's very interesting. If you look at their new cryptocurrency regulation, and they look at the way that they're trying to at least mimic the European Union's cryptocurrency regulation. They have done it to a very good extent, but they have not taken a look at the specific types of typologies that money launderers work with. And to that extent, the regulation is flawed. So what happens currently as we speak, specific its oil, it exports 90% of its oil to China. So Iran is very, very dependent on China to that effect. So they're trying to open some sort of, specific companies or shell companies within Taiwan to launder the money vis-a-vis China. And geographically speaking, it's very convenient to them because it's good for China in the sense that for them, it's easier to take over the country without firing a single bullet. And it's easier for the Iranians to transfer their own funds. So just because the conflict is happening on the other side of the world and a different hemisphere does not mean that it doesn't challenge global regulatory frameworks and does not challenge money laundering typologies. What we're currently viewing within this conflict, and it's very important to bear that in mind, is that just as much as the UAE has suffered, and just as much as Pakistan has suffered from this in Israel, and the UAE is now trying to make up for their mistakes, the same things can happen everywhere. Shell companies and money launderers can operate everywhere. So just as much as it's happening in Taiwan, it can happen in everywhere globally around the globe when you have a lower regulatory threshold. And this is something that we need to bear in mind.
And I think we might, and then the sort of next round might come back to you on that. Eitan, can I actually change tack here? Knowing your work around disinformation, propaganda, and so forth, I was thinking to myself, and I know you do a lot of sort of ONSINT stuff to open source intel. I mean, at one level, open source intel now, the place of social media, it's revolutionizing the access to information. And yet at the other time, we're seeing an enormous amount of fake news, manipulated news, and arguably the Islamic Republic are pretty good at it, both obviously to their own people, but pushing it out into the West. I mean, too much of a question, but how do we counter this from your work and your expertise? How do people sort the wheat from the chaff, if I might?
Sure, it's a great question. There's a lot to unpack, but I'll try to keep it brief. I think the first thing that we need to understand is that we have to understand the way that the Iranian regime thinks about information warfare, right? They see it indistinguishable from the kinetic battlefield. So we have this perception in Western democracies like New Zealand and Australia and the US and in Israel that there's the media, and the media is independent, and what they're doing is it's their own agenda, and they're just in the pursuit of truth. And that's how it is in the West. But what we don't understand, at least not understand enough, is that that's not how the enemies of the West see things. So countries like China, Russia, the Islamic Republic, Qatar, they don't understand that they see the information war as just the flip side of the kinetic battlefield. And I think that you see that, for example, in the things that Iran has been doing since the war started, right? If you look on social media, you see the entire Iranian diplomatic corps mobilized in pursuit of furthering its agenda, right? You see all the embassy accounts on X and on Instagram of the Islamic Republic posting propaganda straight from the IRGC, posting, calling it not Operation Epic Fury, but Operation Epstein Fury, saying that the Jews, the Jews pushed Trump into the war, right? It's not just the it's not just the military or the IRGC trying to fight the war, but it's the diplomatic corps themselves. And I think that the key way to sort of push back against it, the most important thing I could impart on the audience is that we need to increase our digital and media literacy. We need to understand that this is happening, right? We need to understand that most of these accounts that we're following for the information about the war, ones that are pushing out Iranian propaganda narratives, are following the 90-10 rule, which basically it's a KGB method, which basically says that if you are an account, let's say that's in favor of Iran, you're posting 90% of the time accurate content, news developments, military developments. The US struck here, Iran struck here, Donald Trump said this, the US Congress is advancing a bill that does this. That's all fine and legitimate news. But then 10% of the time, they're going to put in narratives that are straight from the IRGC, literally straight from the IRGC. And they sometimes say, source IRGC. And so, or, Iranian embassy in wherever, right? In Kuwait, who knows? And it's important to understand that the reason that they're doing this 90-10 rule is because it gets people to trust these outlets. And so when they see these lies infused with 90% of the time accurate and true content, they'll then instinctively take this fake content or this manipulative content as gospel, right? They'll see it as just as legitimate as this other type of news. And so I think that that's the most important thing is to try to recognize if you're noticing the 90-10 rule. If all of a sudden you're following an account on X that is just putting out normal, OSINT military developments about the war, and then all of a sudden they're putting out something like the Zionists are controlling the parliaments or something like that, maybe think twice about whether you're just being a pawn in some other country's geopolitical game without even realizing it. That would be the main thing I would say.
And if I might, just encouragement to those following this webinar that just about every panelist here, I know Eitan has a social media presence on X in particular or wherever to actually follow them and get content there. Nadeem, might come to you, and I want to change tack from the particularly New Zealand question. I know you're Lebanese yourself, though obviously doing work around the world. With Lebanon's been familiar for decades with terrible conflict, but we've seen I think, a rather remarkable circumstance out of this conflict that actually Israel and Lebanon are talking at the moment. Is there a way forward there? And if I might add on to that as well, is the likes of the UN, the UNIFIL, and so forth, is that a hindrance currently in terms of what is happening? But is there an opportunity here for Israel and Lebanon?
You were talking about the UN, whether it was a hindrance. What else? You
So primarily,
you were cutting
obviously,
up.
oh, so I was asking about the relationship with Israel and Lebanon, noting Lebanon has had decades
Yes.
of conflict,
So
but here we have face-to-face discussions and meetings. That in itself is quite remarkable. Do you see a positive way forward there? And is the UN presence
well,
helpful or a
yes. I
hindrance?
mean, it's not just a positive way forward. It's the only way forward. The only way forward is to basically reach an agreement to replace the 1949 uh, armistice agreement. There were which Israel had with.
We might be having some connection problems. I'm sorry. Nadeem,
Hello,
I
can you
think
hear me?
I can
Yeah,
now. Welcome
I,
back.
I have a bad connection, and I've changed the connection now. I hope it's going to get better. That's why I don't
Seems
have
stable.
my picture on. Yes, so it is the only way forward, and it's happened. The last time direct talks between Israel and Lebanon happened was in 1983. It's and it when after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and the withdrawal of the PLO from Lebanon. So we still have the components of that agreement to build on. And it makes sense to pick up where we left off then. Now, the UN is playing an interesting negative role here because UNIFIL is the mandate of UNIFIL ends at the end of this year. So this puts an important deadline on finding an alternative arrangement because UNIFIL has been there since 1978. So it's a huge vacuum. It can only be filled by the Lebanese government in that sense, and the Lebanese government has been in a way excluded from the South all that time since basically since the Syrian PLO presence, Syrian presence, and Hezbollah presence have been excluding the Lebanese government. So, from the perspective of Lebanon, that's what is at stake. It's simply reconstituting or replacing the armistice agreement of 1949. But Lebanon is also very much affected, I mean, as everybody is, by what's happening in the region, especially with Gulf security. And one component that's essential here is that what we're seeing is that Iran is holding the whole Gulf region hostage by the fact that it can throw missiles at them with at any time. So that's something that nobody can live with in the region.
Simon, can I jump in there and offer
please
my
do. And
feedback?
actually, that's an open invitation to others if there's something you want to add. So, Bren, in your hands.
I think regarding the prospect of the current Israel-Lebanon talks, I think the main barrier between an eventual normalization agreement between them is Hezbollah. Obviously, the substantial presence of Palestinians in Lebanon, the Palestinian community there, is an issue and has been an issue for decades, but I don't think it's an insurmountable issue. But the issue is Hezbollah, and what it boils down to is the Lebanese state willing and able to ultimately defang Hezbollah or prevent Hezbollah from breaking that peace agreement. Currently, the Lebanese state is not. There are strong elements within the government that want to, and I think substantial parts of the Lebanese population want that to happen. But whether or not they're capable of doing it is currently no. So then it boils down to, well, does the West have the willingness to help the Lebanese state do that, and not just the willingness, but the ability to see that through. But then I think the next step is, frankly, it will be very, very difficult to remove Hezbollah as a substantial factor while the Iranian regime is still in play. And I think ultimately, if people want Lebanese-Israeli peace, for that matter, Iranian-Israeli peace, there needs to be some kind of strategic objective to have the Iranian regime implode. And I think it is in the Western interests, and certainly the Middle Eastern interests, that the West institutes all kinds of policies to enable that to ultimately happen.
Can I then throw to you, Ahmed, on that? Because I know you're able to being in Pakistan and in that sort of cultural milieu, understand things more broadly than perhaps we do in the West. I mean, is the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, and these other groups, or even the Islamic regime itself, at one level, and this is as much a question as a statement, we can tactically try to take them out physically, kinetically, but are we also dealing with something that is obviously religious, deeply cultural, that is not just easy to physically remove? I don't think I've articulated that so well, but there's a belief system in the likes of the Islamic Republic, in Hamas, Hezbollah, and others that potentially is hard to remove, if you will, from a military or economic frame.
Yes, Ivan, I think you articulated this very, very well, actually. And I think, there are two or three other battles going on besides the main war with Iran, and those battles are really very important. And I probably would just speak to the points that Eitan and Bren and Nadim and others raised just very quickly. I mean, we have this major disinformation battle going on at two battlegrounds. One is Lebanon and the other is Gulf, and both are really very significant for us here in the region. And I'm not sure that those two battles are well understood in the West, again, because as Eitan very well explained, in the West, it's seen really as freedom of expression or the media, and it stands on its own, and it's a different debate. But it's not a different debate here. It's very real. Let me just give you one very quick example, and then just quickly say something about those two battlegrounds in Lebanon and the Gulf. The example is from yesterday. The embassy, and Eitan was talking about the Iranian embassy accounts. So the Iranian embassy in South Africa tweeted something very interesting. It just said, it's very unfortunate, and it was a tweet in English. It said, it's very unfortunate that a Muslim country that should have been standing on the side of defending Palestinians and Iranians, it implicitly, I mean, tried to say, defend us, the Muslims who are fighting the West, as in Iran. It's unfortunate that a Muslim country is not doing that and prefers to stand with the United States or with Israel and the West. And I assume the account was referring to the United Arab Emirates, but it was also sort of a swipe at the GCC, the Gulf Arab countries, and maybe even Saudi Arabia. So and it. I'm sure you will not be very interested in this tweet. Yeah, so what? It's just a point of view, rhetorical, a point made by an Iranian official account. But actually, it led to a whole battle online. Arabs, the GCC Gulf countries, Lebanon, Jordan, the Egyptians, the Iranians, everybody was involved fighting this side battle online. Why it's important? See, in Lebanon, we have a battle, and disinformation matters here. We have a battle, really. It's not just about Hezbollah and the state of Lebanon and Israel. It's also about the future of whether the state or militias are going to decide the future in the region. So, basically, in this small country of Lebanon, for me, in sitting in Islamabad, it's very important how this battle will turn out, because this will decide whether the rest of the 21st century will be decided in our region, in the Arab Muslim region mainly, but also Israel, because it's directly impacted by this, and by association, the West. Will the militias and militant organizations will decide the policy and the future, as Hezbollah is trying to do in Lebanon, or will it be the state, as the Lebanese government and the military are trying to sort of seize initiative? So this is hugely important, really. So that's one. And the other thing is, in the Gulf, it's not just Arabs or Persians or Gulf states, moderate Arab states. It's really about Arab moderation fighting Islamism in the region. Iran today represents not only Shiite jihadism, but is also a strong supporter of Sunni Muslim jihadism, as in Hamas and other organizations across the region, mainly the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the largest Sunni Muslim political organization, in many ways also a militant Sunni Muslim organization. And Iran is funding and financing those groups, all of them. So in the Gulf, you don't just simply have Gulf Arabs versus Iran. You also have Arab moderation, Arab regimes that are pushing moderation, like the UAE, like Kuwait, like Jordan, like Saudi Arabia, like Morocco, and versus the Islamism that Iran is trying to sustain across the region and not letting it die. So these two disinformation or information battlefields are as important as the main battle with Iran and the Iranian regime.
It's an aspect, my reflection here, it's an aspect that's not often put forward here in New Zealand, to actually understand where the various Arab states are aligning, be it publicly or more often quietly, with the concerns of the likes of what Iran and its philosophies are doing. A quick reminder to those watching, we have very eminent panelists here. If you have questions, please put them into the chat. If you want to direct them to anyone in particular, note that as well. And thank you to those who have questioned already. As expected, particularly to the panelists, these are... Oh, sorry, Nadeem, go for it.
Can I just step in with two quick comments on what Bren and Ahmed said about Lebanon? Uh, from where I'm sitting in Lebanon, it's very normal to be in disagreement, and our neighbors down south also have that kind of normality. So consensus is out of the question in a country like Lebanon, and I think it is also out of the question in a country like Israel, like Israel. So the question is to follow the procedures of the constitution, and whether they can, and the consultations happen during the talks, as they do everywhere. So that's, but what Ahmed said is also very important. I want to just give you a quick scenario of what would happen if there is an agreement with Iran that would guarantee non-aggression to Iran from the United States. If Iran reaches a stage where either it has a nuclear power or an agreement of non-aggression, the whole Middle East region will become a bit like what Eastern Europe used to be during the Soviet Union, which means that Iran can intervene with very plausible deniability and create problems in Bahrain or Kuwait or Iraq or even Saudi Arabia, and and nobody can can stop it. So you're, and that's what Ahmad is referring to, where all these countries will be controlled by veto power by militias, which are proxies of Iran. It's a fascinating system. It's like it is an empire in a way, an empire in the making that
Yeah.
penetrates that penetrates. But the other thing is that it is not Islamism versus. Just to clarify, it's not Islamism versus secularism. It's radicalism versus liberalism. Because on the side of the Islamic radicals, who are inheritors of the radicalism of the 1970s and 80s, that whole general atmosphere, which was present when the Iranian revolution happened. There are secular people even in the West who support who support that radicalism. So it's not, and the Gulf states that are quite liberal in the sense of tolerance, in the sense of certain degree of freedom and all that, are certainly not secular in that sense. So it's not that binary between secularism and Islamism. It's more global, between radical ideas that can be religious, that can be even Catholic, like liberation theology and stuff like that, and a more liberal outlook of the world. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
I might then just jump to you, Eitan, and in terms of, see if I can explain this. Do those in the West often misunderstand the very dynamics at play? Nadeem has talked around obviously the different approaches within uh, Islam. Is there an arrogance that you've seen online in the West in particular, whether it's New Zealand, Australia, the UK, who sort of think that their liberal secular values are just normal and accepted by all in any group, and there's a failure to understand the different cultural, religious, political, social elements in play in the likes of the Middle East?
It's a great question, and I think that the answer, largely speaking, is yes. And I think that we saw definitely evidence of that during the 2000s with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, how the U.S., I think very admirably, hoped that it could go and just foster democracy in the region. But listen, local populations sometimes are just not into that. The Western civilization is the byproduct of thousands of years of a marriage between Greek reason and the Bible, right? So that's after thousands of years you have these Western democracies prop up and spreading liberalism across the world. But like that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So I think that they mistakenly believe that other populations will want the same thing. But not everyone does. I think so. I think now there's less of of an assumption in the West that everyone else just wants what they want. But I think that the enemies and the adversaries of the West are playing on those past mistakes, right? So you'll see official Iranian accounts and allies of the Iranian regime saying things like, "Oh, it's just the U.S. trying to encroach in the region and spread democracy like it failed to do in Afghanistan and Iraq," and to it's pumping out those same narratives that you see from sort of the isolationist parties that have been really um, uh, and the young American public that have been sort of scorned by those wars in the 2000s, the war on terror. You see the Iranian regime playing on those fears and those anxieties and that trauma. So I think that that's sort of like the reverse is happening as well. So there is a bit of this assumption that's taking place in the West, but more pertinent than that is just the fact that the Islamic Republic recognizes that and is playing off of it. That I think is the bigger concern here.
Al, I want to turn to you, if I might. It is somewhat in the regulatory space, so I'm no expert. You touched on earlier of how the Islamic regime operates through not only its proxies but where it channels its money. One of the live debates here in New Zealand is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has not been designated a terrorist regime. And this is across multiple governments, whether it's the centre left or the centre right. Our Persian community here, and Bren might, I don't know what the situation is in Australia, but here in New Zealand, they're not designated. I mean, for you, Ella, is designating the likes of the IRGC an essential part of being able to throttle, if you will, their global network of influence, be it money laundering or other activities?
Yes and no. So specifically for the issue of sanctions, and I know that this, specific issue has been dealt upon extensively, both in the European Union and the US, and funny enough, even in the UK, which was targeted by the RIGC regarding the RIGC's attack on the UK base in Cyprus. They're still not designated, and the Iranian ambassador has not been sent back to Iran. I think this is a crucial matter of whether sanctions should be imposed or not. But the more crucial matter is whether they should be enforced or not. And specifically on the matter of enforcement, you see that many countries on one end issue sanctions, but on the other end do not enforce them. So it's very nice and it's all well and good to issue sanctions, but regarding enforcement, without proper enforcement, you will not be able to maintain a specific regulatory space that is open and safe for everyone. So to that effect, what I would really suggest is if an issue is being arisen specifically for the issue of sanctions, it's crucial that they should be enforced.
We've just seemed to have slowed down a bit there, but thank you, Ella. Eitan, I think you were wanting to jump in.
Yes, it does seem that way.
Yeah, sorry, you guys hear me?
We can. Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
we
great.
can.
I would also, okay, fantastic. So I'd also like to add, just in terms of the fact that a lot of countries have designated the IRGC, but like not entirely, or have designated Hezbollah, but only like the political wing. And I just want to add that that's another result of this sort of large-scale, multi-decade propaganda effort where they've created these sort of they meaning the Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic, and so on. They've created this sort of artificial distinction, which is not real in my opinion at all, where they're saying there's the political section of these institutions and these organizations and these groups, and then there's the military section, and they're not the same thing. That's their contention. I think that's completely inaccurate, and I think that that's just a narrative that's being pushed in order so that they can get away with operating freely, right? So you'll have in the I think Hamas is the most clear and prominent example where you'll say Hamas will say, "Oh, we had elections the other day, and Khalil al-Khaya was named the chairman of the Hamas political bureau." But then there's the military bureau. What does that even mean, right? As if the political bureau and the military bureau aren't part of the same thing, right? You'll see the media say, "Oh, there's the militant wing of the IRGC versus like the decision-making apparatus of the IRGC." No, it's the exact same thing. But the idea that these are two separate arms is it's a complete fiction, and it's being spread intentionally so that you can designate one part of the organization, but the other part of the organization is going to be able to travel freely, bank properly, right? Enjoy the fruits of the Western banking system and so on. And I think that that's an important fact to recognize as well.
I'm
If I
pleased
may
to
jump
raise it.
into that,
Yeah,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Sorry, Ella. No, go for it.
If you may please jump into that. I think what Eitan said is very, very relevant, mainly because if you look at modern banking, one of the ways to avert or make sure that sanctions are enforced is to make sure that certain banking transactions are not allowed. How do you make sure that certain banking transactions are not allowed? You stop them with compliance officers. That's how it works. You can't create a fragmentation between the RGC's military branch and the governmental branch of the same institution, and for the same reason that they basically took the country hostage. If you look at Hezbollah, for instance, you also have that fragmentation, and Nadim mentioned that very well, in the sense that Hezbollah essentially took Lebanon hostage to that specific effect. And then they have the military wing in which they're attacking countries around them specifically. And then you have the governmental wing, which is essentially controlling the inside central issues of the same country. The same thing with the IRGC and the same thing with many other terror organizations around the world. So the mere fact that you have this fragmentation, it's very nice for optics. It's not very practical. This is why what I mentioned earlier, that the enforcement of sanctions should be enforced ad hoc, and it should be enforced in every single terror group around the world and every single designated sanctioned entity. You can't designate and then not enforce. And this is something that the West is doing very well at the moment. They are sanctioning and at the same time enforcing, but this was not the case up until January 2026.
No, thank you. This has been a live discussion a few years ago in New Zealand, I think, and I'm happy to be corrected. New Zealand's designated the military side of Hezbollah a terrorist group, but not the political side. It's an absolute, to me, an absurdity. Bren, can I draw you in again down a different angle? And I'm not wanting to get too much into trade, the politics of trade, but the question I had is, from us down here, again, New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific, is this conflict going to change the way that we trade? Are we going to see the likes of New Zealand move, and Australia too, away from non-Arab oil sources? Are people going to choose to fly east through America to get to Europe rather than flying through Dubai or Doha? Is this conflict going to have, as you say, that effect in the short and the long term in the way that we trade and act towards the Middle East?
I think I can answer that in three very succinct ways. First of all, I'm not a trade specialist and hesitate to answer definitively on those sorts of questions. Second of all, I think the market will follow the cheapest. Yeah, like people will go where it's cheap, and so if US oil becomes cheaper than Gulf oil, then that's where the market will flow. That again, I'm not a trade specialist, but that's my understanding. But I think thirdly, and this is more possibly, a couple of years ago, China aggressively boycotted a number of Australian goods, red wine, this, that. And the reason China did it was a very aggressive way to apply diplomatic pressure on the West at large by making an example over Australia. And this is because our Prime Minister at the time questioned Chinese lack of help regarding the emergence of the COVID virus. And as a result, and it took several years, and eventually China lifted the boycott. But as a result of that, Australian producers started trying to diversify where they were sending their goods. And so it's quite possible that as a result of this, Australian and New Zealand and other consumers will try and diversify where they're getting their oil products. But again, I don't know, and this is the kind of question I'd throw to people who are far more knowledgeable on these issues than me.
Yeah, I threw you a bit in the deep end to throw you a trade question. I'll come back with a few others. Look, one question that's coming through, We've got some questions coming through from the audience. I'm going to start blending them in. A reminder to those on the webinar that if you do have questions or thoughts that you want us to put to the panelists, please put them, in the chat. One's come through here, and I might start with you, Nadeem, if I might. It's asking, do you feel that the Lebanese in Lebanon are becoming more emboldened to speak out against Hezbollah? Is there a change on the ground?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a factor. This is a factor of many. I mean, many elements. One of them is the military defeat of Iran, which and the military defeat of Hezbollah. So that we feel that. But there's a very important element here also, which is that what Israel is doing in the south, the destruction of villages and the continuous bombardment uh, of the whole region there is also a negative factor in that because it strengthens uh, support for Hezbollah. I mean, Israel has a very strange way of making itself loved in this context, and it makes uh, it gives more legitimacy to the idea that you have an enemy that needs to be resisted rather than an enemy that you can talk to. So if I am part of the Lebanon that wants to talk, what Israel is doing is making it difficult for me to argue with the part of Lebanon that wants to fight. And that's a very, very important element. It's far more important than anything else. And we all know that there is no military solution to this. The solution has to be political. I mean, if Israel could not get rid of Hamas militarily in 2 years in Gaza that it controls, then certainly there is no military solution to get rid of Hezbollah here either. The solution is political, and what Israel is doing is making the solution much more difficult.
Ahmed, can
If
I
I
bring
may
you
chime
in?
in, Simon, if that's
Sorry.
okay, Nadeem. Yeah, I'm sorry, Nadeem. So first of all, it's a pleasure to meet you. And to that effect, if I may say so, I got married recently, few months ago, and I was mentioning to my now husband that hopefully there will be a time that we can hold our honeymoon in Beirut, to that effect. So it's a pleasure to meet you. I would like to clarify 2 points that you mentioned, which are quite crucial. Regarding Hamas specifically, if you look at the current military campaign against Hamas in Gaza, you can't see that Hamas has been deminimized to a very significant effect. And yes, it is a political solution that you need to find specifically for Hamas. This is why you have the Trump coalition to make sure that that does happen. And also for Hezbollah, if you're looking for a political solution to make sure that Hezbollah is not part of the problem, it's a Lebanese issue. And this Lebanese issue should be dealt on a political matter. Now, I do think to that effect that we can help the Lebanese government in that extent to make sure that the terror groups that are hijacking Lebanon will be taken out of power. But again, this is an internal Lebanese issue.
Ahmed, could I draw you in, and then Bren and Eitan, if you have as well? Again, as I said at the start, Ahmed, you have seen a lot of conflicts. You're in, Pakistan is at the center of a lot of this in terms of being able to observe what is happening around. I mean, what's your take on what Nadeem is saying?
Yeah, that's very interesting, of course. And I've lived also in Beirut for some time. So I have many friends obviously there. So that debate is really very interesting. I understand where Nadeem is coming from, and I understand Ella's point as well. And congratulations, Ella, belated on your wedding. And so, I understand that. But I also see one more thing, Simon, and of course Nadeem is an expert because he's living in that society, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. I've noticed that for many years, you could not talk or say many of the things that the Lebanese media is finally now discussing very openly, and this is honestly, I tell you, I mean, apart, if I put aside my work and everything else, just as a human being, as somebody who's lived in this region, I lived in Kuwait, a bit in Jordan, visited Syria, lived for a while in Iraq. I mean, we've interacted with people. We used to be in a school, Simon here, and some of our colleagues from Lebanon, for example, or from Iraq, couldn't talk openly about very normal things, political developments. They were afraid because they were afraid that they're being monitored and their families could be hurt either where they're living right now or back home in Lebanon or in Iraq or in Syria. So it was really it's real. So for me, for example, to see people to the Lebanese media discussing things that were absolutely impossible just 2 years ago is shows that certain actions, even if they're described as militaristic, as in, for example, the assassination of the head of Hezbollah right in the middle of Beirut, and of course, I'm sure property was destroyed. Probably some innocent people died, unfortunately. But that also resulted in a change in Lebanon that is unprecedented. People, very prominent Lebanese, were killed just for writing a play in Arabic discussing, for example, the ideology behind Hezbollah, Khomeiniism or Islamism, whatever you want to call it. And they were killed, and journalists and whatnot, and obviously politicians. There's a change, and people are beginning now. I have friends from the Lebanese Shiite community, which is supposed to be the base of Hezbollah, and the community that the Khomeinists in Iran hijacked really to build Hezbollah and devastate, frankly, southern Lebanon, not just Lebanon itself, but southern Lebanon. And I have many, many friends. And I have friends, for example, I would walk into the office of a very good friend of mine who's a journalist, a prominent journalist, a Lebanese from the South, a Shiite Muslim Lebanese journalist, who would say, Ahmed, I can talk to you, I can explain to you things. I can't talk publicly, I can't write about certain things because my cousins and people who are connected in some way to Hezbollah or have been hijacked, are under intimidation and they could get hurt. Those people are now beginning to speak and write for the first time in 2 years. And this is happening for the first time since Hezbollah was created in the 80s. So this is like huge. So what I'm just trying to say, and I'll stop here, is I'm just trying to say is, yes, we can talk in terms of analyses and stereotypes and whether what country A did in Lebanon, what Israel did in Lebanon, or what the U.S. is doing in terms of the pressure is right or wrong, and what's the best way to deal with Hezbollah, whether it's military option or political. I mean, it's all debatable, but the fact remains that the actions taken in the last 2 years did result in freeing, for example, the Lebanese political system to at least talk about defanging Hezbollah, de-weaponizing Hezbollah, which was nearly impossible just 2 years ago. So a lot of the things that I hear from the Lebanese prime minister or the Lebanese president, and what the Lebanese army is saying or doing, a lot of it is really positive, Lebanese media, that was not possible just 2 years ago. So I'm sure something good happened in these 2 years, while also acknowledging all the legitimacy of everything else in terms of the wider debate.
May I
Bren, I
just
might
comment
turn
on what
to.
Ahmed says? I'm sorry.
I might actually just throw it to Bren but we can come back as we're in these last 15 or so minutes. Bren, your take on this discussion and debate, and including actually, it's picking up one of the questions, which I'll quickly read, which has come through, which is really saying, what actions do people believe Israel should take to support a peace-supporting Lebanese rather than halting just military advancements? But your take on what's been discussed here.
Yeah, what Ahmed just said, I wish I had have said. I agree with what he just said. But I think Israel's what Israel could do is and frankly, they could do this in a lot of their strategic environments, is to provide direction as to what an outcome that they would like. Um, and so vis-a-vis Gaza, of course, West Bank, and of course, and Lebanon and Syria as well. And some of those, the fact that Israel is engaged in talks with Lebanon is out there. But I think ultimately that's what Israel could do, sort of put on paper, this is what we want, this is our outcome. These are our red lines. Obviously, in the nature of these things, you can't be too definitive because situations are flexible. But I think Israel telegraphing that kind of idea would be the most useful.
Hmm.
Uh,
Eitan, and I'll come to you after this, Ella. Eitan, are you seeing anything on the social media space which is playing into aspects of this debate? Are you seeing more Lebanese discussing and debating? Is there debate within the Israeli community of how to now engage with a Lebanon more open to discussing the future without Hezbollah?
Yeah, so I've definitely seen an increased openness. I've been tracking this narrative with social listening tools, so I'm able to see that there is a spike in calls for peace between the countries, and the Israeli public, including myself, obviously, and I imagine Ella as well, are very much in favor of peace between the two countries. I hope we can work it out, and I hear Lebanon is a beautiful country, and I look forward to visiting in the near future, please God. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of I don't obviously know the Israeli establishment's overall plan, what the strategic plan is, if there is one. I assume there is one, but I will say that certainly there's a grassroots there's a rumbling happening under the surface where people really want this. And I think that if there's I believe, based on the data that I'm seeing, but also just understanding political incentives, if there is what appears to be a genuine yearning for peace among the Israeli public with Lebanon, after Hezbollah is rooted out, of course, I think that the political class will jump on the opportunity as well. I think that Israel has displayed that time and again, that even former adversaries can certainly become partners in peace. Obviously, the UAE has demonstrated this, most I think most clearly. But we'll see what happens. I think, like I said, if the political class sees that we, the public, want this, it incentivizes them to go for it. And so I think that people should continue to speak out in favor of the peace. And it may take a couple of years, but I think we can get there.
Ella, I cut you off rudely a little earlier,
Yes, no,
so
no, I was rude. I apologize. I was Israeli for a moment. Anyhow, what I did want to mention specifically regarding enforcement, and this comes back to our original point. Regulatory enforcement is very crucial also when it comes to NGOs. One of the most prominent NGOs when it comes to Hezbollah is Carlill Hassan. But funny enough, it's operating as a bank. One of the ways to actually enforce sanctions against Carlill Hassan is to make sure that the Ministry of Interior within Lebanon, that, by the way, I checked it this morning, they're not registered. They haven't registered the specific registry number of Carlill Hassan. Carlill Hassan's number is 217. You have 216 and you have 218. So speaking specifically about enforcement, and this comes back to the original point, I do think that the Western allies, and also when I mean Western allies, I mean the US and the EU, you are able to minimize the amount of effect that Hezbollah does if you just enforce some sort of economic warfare. Part of this economic warfare should also come from the Lebanese government in a way that it should say, part of my Ministry of Interior is in charge of registering NGOs, and this should not be registered anymore. And we should not operate this as a financial institution, because at the end of the day, this financial institution is not helping any sort of on the long term, helping the Lebanese people. It's helping Hezbollah.
I think a lot of this actually, Ella, if I might, is actually a good reminder that approaching these situations doesn't simply have to be a military option.
No,
As
it can be a financial solution as well.
Some of the questions coming through and certainly put to me before we started this, and I might start with you, Bren, if I might, and others, I'll come to you to opine. It is on the military aspect and the nature of warfare that we're now seeing in the Middle East. If I was to put it really simply, you've got massive American firepower, and if I might say provocatively, they still can't get ships through the strait. We know, for example, they've got their THAAD system. God knows how many millions of dollars it is per missile to take out a cheap Shahed drone. Are we seeing a change in the nature of warfare here? Obviously, in the kinetic side, and Eitan, I'll come to you on again the disinformation side. But when we reflect on the conflict currently, Bren, is there lessons that, if you will, our militaries and others should be taking note of down here in the Pacific?
Yes, I think though the key lessons to look at, or the key military uh, classroom, so to speak, to draw lessons from is the Ukraine-Russia war. A lot of the tactics that Iran has used in this conflict is borrowed from that war. Particularly the use of drones and stuff. The Ukrainians have been remarkably adaptable, but so have the Russians, and we're seeing that in the Gulf now. So yes, militaries are always looking at conflicts to draw lessons. No one wants to, if you fight the last war, you'll often lose this one. So yeah, I mean, but obviously the use of drones. In Israel, they've done it for a couple of years, but the use of AI in terms of working out, target selection and sort of, narrowing different options has been utilized for a couple of years, and various militaries are drawing lessons from that as well. So I'm going on a bit, but the short answer is yes. There are a lot of lessons to learn. I've got no doubt that the ADF, the Australian Defence Forces, are looking very closely at these situations and what they can do. That said, the Australian strategic posture is, we are a large land mass. We don't expect to fight, a ground invasion in Australia anytime soon. And our
Not with all the New Zealanders immigrating.
yeah, well, yeah.
Sorry, bad humor. Cut that out.
When it comes to the rugby, maybe we'll have a few skirmishes. But no. Look, our forces tend to deploy in small units, typically to assist American fights, and that's been the case since World War II. So in terms of force protection and things like that, I think that's the main lessons that we'll be drawing. But yes, is the short answer to your question.
Before I jump to Nadeem and the others, and again, it's not assuming people here are military experts. It's more just a reflection on what we're seeing militarily. But Bren, a question's come in that says here, New Zealand and Australia have traditionally been cautious about a deep defence cooperation with Israel. Given the current security dynamics, is this something that might change with the likes of Israel or maybe even Ukraine at the forefront of what's going on in terms of changing warfare? Would there be the potential for more?
I think Australia and New Zealand security agencies have had deep cooperation with Israel for many, many years. I don't think they were cautious about it. There's been lots of military trade, at least between Australia and Australia and Israel over the years. I can't speak for New Zealand. I think Australia is becoming more cautious because of the political situation. Politically, Israel, at least on one side of the political spectrum, is becoming increasingly toxic, and so I think Australian governments, particularly the current Labor government, is cautious about that. But in terms of intelligence cooperation, there's deep cooperation. There has been for a long time, and I think that will continue. But I don't think as a result of the current war that there will be overt military cooperation between Australia and Israel, and I doubt New Zealand and Israel either.
Yeah. Nadeem, is there any military lessons that are being taken from the work that you were doing? Again, it's not assuming that you guys are all here are military experts per se, but yeah, any lessons that you were taking from what's happening at the moment?
I'm certainly not a military expert. My only point about the military aspects is that what matters is the political impact of that military conversation, if you like, and you can have a positive impact from a military operation, but if you push it too far, you can overreach, and it will be a negative impact. I mean, the Iranians have overreached. They very cleverly kept the battle away from their own territory for 40 years. They fought the United States in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Gaza, in Yemen. But this time they messed up. They they are at the center of the battle because they overreached after October 7. After October 7, it became obvious that they are the main target. They put themselves as the main target after October 7. So that's what I mean. Now there's another thing with this distinction between military and civilian wing. This is an invention of the British because that's how they dealt with the IRA, and it's useful to be able to talk. It gives you an excuse to talk and to go to parties in Beirut when there is a Hezbollah minister there, or otherwise you can't do your job. But it is an artificial division, and when you the whole the but what Hezbollah did is hijack the whole Shiite community over 40 years, and you have to be careful that you don't kill the hostage when you want to kill the hostage taker, when you want to target the hostage taker. So that's it's very delicate. And for us in Lebanon, it's uh, it's a political matter between the Lebanese that they have to resolve, and some external actions are helpful. Some of them are not. That's and Again, congratulations, Ella, on your wedding. Like,
I'm conscious of time,
Oh,
so I
thank you
do
very
still
much.
want to go to the other panelists, and then one last quick question. Eitan, if I can turn to you, we talk a lot about the military side, symmetrical warfare and so forth, but there's the hybrid, the grey side. I mean, from your perspective, has this particular conflict raised new, I don't want to use the word opportunities, but new insights into how war is being waged?
Sure. So I think obviously the most um, obvious development is the incredible in a very disturbing way. I mean, use of AI in order to push narratives. So it used to be that you'd have embassies or organizations or terror groups, militant groups, whatever you want to call them, with they'd have like entire teams devoted to creating content, and they'd have to have their operatives. They have to have studios and media offices and video cameras and all. Like it was all production, right? Just like you would create a video or a podcast or a webinar, it would be the same thing for these guys. But now with the advent of AI, they have the ability to create rapid fire content for a fraction of the cost at lightning speed. And with the ability to go viral that no one has really ever seen before. So that's why you have the Iranian embassies putting out constant videos of like President Trump with Jeffrey Epstein, there's like a Jeffrey Epstein monster attached to his shoulder, whispering in his ear at night, totally created with AI. I think I know the programs that they use to create it. It's a little bit on the pricey side, but if you have the IRGC's budget, that's not really a problem. And they created it. It goes uber viral. And even if people know that it is coming from the Islamic Republic and that it's AI, which obviously you can tell because I don't think Donald Trump has a monster coming out of his shoulder. It's still just it's thought-provoking. It spurs conversation, right? It spurs articles in the New York Times. People are talking about it, and that's good for the Islamic Republic. So I think for sure AI, and I also think this was the first time that at least the U.S. experienced this with one of its adversaries, and it's something that the entire Western world needs to take note of, is that the Islamic Republic spoke directly to the public. It did not speak to the political class. It didn't even speak to the media. It bypassed the gatekeepers completely. So you have, you know, Pezeshkian, the president of Iran. You have Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran. You have the heads of the IRGC, at least the ones that are still alive, tweeting in English to the public about how the war is going to raise your grocery prices and raise your gas prices. That's crazy. I mean, think about that just a few years ago. No, you'd have to go through official media channels. You'd have to be interviewed. You'd have to go on like the BBC or Sky News or whatever. Now they're speaking directly to the audience, and it's resonating with the audience because things are going viral. And obviously, there are bots that are amplifying the content. But just the notion that you have foreign governments engaging in public diplomacy directly with civilians of their adversary is a huge development, and I think that the entire West should take note of it because that's going to be the way of the future, and we need to understand that tactic and replicate it and do it even better.
I'm pleased you mentioned, I'm not going to riff on this for long, but I often say to friends and others I'm debating, why is it that the Islamic regime is tweeting to you in English that is not their primary language? Take a second to ponder that. Ella, coming quickly to you then, Ahmed, on that whole question of the military side, and then I want to wrap up very quickly with a last question. But any thoughts on how the military campaign has changed people's perceptions?
Yes, I think you can see it in a twofold manner, and you need to bear in mind, as some of the world experts mentioned on this panel, I'm not a military expert. I haven't have enough experience to comment specifically on that. But what I can say is that if you look at this specific campaign and you look at the war within the last almost 3 years, since October 7th, the one thing you can learn from this specific escapade is the fact that even when you do have a military campaign, some sort of political agreement or governmental agreement between countries is crucial. You need to have a political agreement that is embedded with a financial regulatory framework with a strong belief in the fact that we as a union, as a Middle Eastern union, will be much stronger together than apart. And to that effect, I'm also writing my PhD to that effect, so I've been researching that to a great extent. One of the things that I do view that will have an impact within the next few years is the fact that if we, as a Middle Eastern union, hopefully one day, will have the option to maintain our own borders maritime-wise, we wouldn't have the issue of Hormuz. And it's of the great benefit of the entire world for us as a union to be stronger than apart. And again, also it comes back to the issue of oil. Do we take sides with the Chinese or the Americans, or do we serve ourselves and open our own economic oil superpower?
Ahmed, for yourself, any reflections that are coming out of the military campaign? I mean, these are each and every question is huge, but any reflections that you have in terms of how the military campaign is, well, impacting in and of itself, how it's be it impacting Pakistan?
Definitely, Simon M&S, someone who's covered wars. Frankly, these after October 7, the war, and of course the Iran war. These have changed perceptions in this region. It's a whole new world. Frankly, I mean, I'm watching the Gulf Arab media, for example, excitedly discussing the armament, new weapon purchases, new alliances. They're talking about, importing the Iron Dome from Israel. They're talking about the new Ukrainian technologies to counter suicide drones. It's amazing to see Ukrainian experts and Gulf Arab military officials putting their heads together to sort of develop, even newer technologies to tackle or handle the kind of combat that the IRGC indulged in. Not just the IRGC itself from Iran, but also its proxies, whether Hezbollah in Lebanon or Hamas in Gaza. Everybody's watching that very closely. I can tell you definitely the place where I'm sitting in Pakistan, they're watching this very, very closely. That they had in the middle of this war, that they had their own war. India and Pakistan had their own war just a year ago, last May, and it spurred, frankly, a discussion in both India and Pakistan on the future of the armies and whether we need to really focus more on air defense systems and aircraft and drones. So it's yes, it's all across the region from Israel to Lebanon to Iran to Saudi Arabia and the UAE to Pakistan and India. Everybody's discussing these things, and so yes, the short answer is I think we are looking at a very different future in terms of how the militaries are going to sort of plan for the future and the lessons they're drawing. And not everybody, by the way, Simon, is being very open as to the lessons they've drawn from everything that happened in these last 3 years. It's still ongoing, the conflict, and I think the Hormuz element, how the US and everyone else is going to go about it. We're hearing from the Gulf Arab media, for example, just in the past few hours, that some of the Gulf Arab countries, maybe one, maybe two, probably are getting involved in kinetic action that is not public or declared as retaliation to what the hits that they've received. I don't know how much of that is confirmed, but it seems to be parts of it seems to be real. So we're looking at a total new way of warfare and fighting, and let's see how it unfolds into the future. But yes, we're in completely new territory.
Can I just
Go for it, Nadeem.
add one?
Lovely to see you.
Yes, thank you. I just want to add one footnote to what Ahmed said, and that the transformation that he's talking about is not sustainable, and may not be positive, in the sense that the Gulf countries, as they have evolved, cannot become a military society. And for them to transform into a military society, they can no longer be the financial hub and the Dubai of that we know. So to coexist with the Iranian threat in a military way, which he has described, will not necessarily be a positive transformation of these societies. I don't see them surviving as they are now, which I think is good. If they have to become a militarized society.
We have a whole new webinar being developed here as we speak. Look, we're over time, which is very typical for anything that I moderate. I just want to put one very simple question to each of you, and if we could, short reply is really a final message from each of you to New Zealanders, but also the Australians, those in the Pacific here, in terms of how to reflect on. In fact, it's almost an open checkbook. If there was a message you were to give to Kiwis, to those on the panel, to Australians, around this conflict of how they might choose to engage, to reflect on it, even opportunities, dare I say, it's not to belittle the nature of conflict. Is there anything that you might like to share? And Eitan, if I might throw it to you first, as someone who's very capable in the social media space, is there any message you'd like to give to those on the webinar tonight?
Sure. I'd say, well, thank you again, first of all, for this really illuminating discussion. I think the most important thing I would say is treat everything you're seeing with a healthy dose of skepticism, right? Virality on social media is not synonymous with truth. There are agendas here at play that might not be obvious to you, but it's obvious to the people promoting them. Just pay attention to what information you're consuming, who you're consuming the information from. In particular, you guys sitting in Australia and New Zealand are in a very strategic location. You have lots of Chinese influence operations trying to influence you guys as well. You're often the first targets of these sort of disinformation campaigns. So not even just in the context of this war, but in general, right? treat everything you're seeing with some skepticism. Take the extra 5 seconds to click on the source that you're reading it from, understand who the source is and what agendas they might have, and I think it'll open your eyes to a lot of new perspectives and things that you weren't realizing before.
Ella, if I might throw to you, I mean, feel free to put in some early marriage advice too, if you wish.
Well, to that effect, my husband will have to be on this call as well. The one thing I can say, and I do want to resonate with Eitan said, take everything that you read with a very healthy dose of reality. Make sure to engage with experts in the field. I know that sometimes, especially young researchers who are just before their PhD or just after their master's, when they do look into this specific topic, it's so complex and it's so and it's like a mosaic. It's covered with so many different types of information that you need to make sure that you engage the right professional for the right type of information. And even within the Middle East, you have experts for military action, you have experts for regulatory frameworks, you have experts for kinetic warfare. You need to make sure that you engage the right expert for the right topic.
And speaking of experts, Bren, I mean, this is your bread and butter. Any last encouragements, thoughts, insights for the viewers tonight?
Um, First of all, thank you again for having me and the rest of the panel on. It's been really good listening to everyone else's opinion this afternoon. My parting words would be, I think, basically since the end of the Cold War, the Western strategic thought has been drifting. The West doesn't know what it wants. I mean, beyond what do the Americans say? Life, happiness, and a life and something. But the West doesn't know what it wants. It doesn't know who its friends are. It doesn't know. It doesn't. And particularly, it doesn't really know who its enemies are. And I think it would be valuable for the West, and I think this war has illuminated some of those core issues, but it would be valuable to the West to realize what Western interests are, and then which countries in the world either share those interests or are willing to put up with them, and which countries in the world are seeking to undermine Western interests. And I think Western strategic policy should be, we need to start undermining those countries and those regimes and those ideologies that seek to undermine Western interests. And I think this war has highlighted our absence of strategic thought in the West, and that's where I would encourage listeners and viewers to have a think about.
Again, could be a whole new tangent, and it reflects my own thought here. But when the West doesn't understand its own values and foundations, it doesn't surprise me personally that we're confused about who we should be friends and cautious around. Ahmed, if I might turn to you before we finish with Nadeem, any last thoughts to particularly our Pacific, Australian, and New Zealand viewers?
Yes, Simon, thank you very much for having all of us. I'm going away with really some very, very interesting insights from this webinar. And to the Kiwis, I would just say, I used to think that the global village was the end of history, but this war really shows us how really we're, interconnected even deeper than we thought. So I'd say to the Kiwis, keep a healthy interest in what's going on here. There's a perception always, New Zealand, Australia are too far away, but it's not, and as a lifelong fascinated, student of history, I've always been very fascinated by how New Zealanders and Australians really shaped the modern world and the modern Western civilization that we live in, and so you guys had a huge impact, and I feel it acutely. Why? Because sitting in Pakistan, for example, my father, who would have been 102-year-old had he been around, was part of some of the British military expeditions in Asia and the Middle East back in World War II. And it just, the role that the Kiwis played in shaping today's world is understated often and is not mentioned, and it should be. And the reason I'm invoking it right now is just to tell your listeners in New Zealand and Australia that your healthy interest in what's happening in this war is important. and should be sustained.
You'll have noticed, Ahmed, I haven't mentioned the cricket with your good self,
Oh, yeah.
just as much as I've avoided mentioning the
course.
rugby with Bren. Nadim, last word goes to you before I hand this back to Josh. Any thoughts or messages to our audience, like particularly in New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific?
Yes. I mean, I think if I want to summarize it, it's that ignorance is bliss, and if you reach a stage where you can ignore what's happening in the region, it means that you're happy. But at this stage, you can't, because what happens here affects everybody globally. And I would second the healthy skepticism of listening to experts, who, especially now, I think this particular war with Iran, especially in America and in Europe, has so much emotions involved in it that I would uh, completely dismiss a lot of the expertise I listen to, except us here present.
Of course, but that goes without saying. Hey, can I, before I hand back to Josh, just to thank each and every one of you as panelists for being here. I mean, just about every question, every line of discussion in itself could generate an entire webinar and discussion over hours. So look, thank you for that, and obviously to our viewers and listeners, it's greatly appreciated. But again, thank you to each of you. And Josh, if I hand back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon. It's been a fascinating discussion. To our panelists, Bren, Sam, Ella, Ahmed, Eitan, Nadim, Chad, thanks so much for helping me manage everything in the background. Simon, thanks so much. So yeah, we covered a lot of ground, disinformation, possibility of peace with Lebanon, how warfare is changing, the regulatory aspect, politics of the conflict, Iran strategy, asymmetric warfare. And I like the idea of a Middle East union, maybe sometime in the future, as Ella mentioned a little bit earlier on. So yeah, I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I really would love to do another follow-up geopolitical discussion at some point in the future. Hopefully, Simon will do the honors again. But look, thanks everybody for joining, and I wish you, for those in the Middle East and in Asia, I wish you a pleasant day, and for those Kiwis, enjoy the rest of your night. So, thanks so much for joining.